Happy Thursday, Xavier Basketball fans. This is your weekly Razorcast. That's Jeff Zink and Jim Reaker talking Muskie basketball. And, Jim, a nice sunny day for us to talk about it today, huh?
Great day to be a Muskie, isn't it? 11-1, number 9 in the AP poll, number 8 in the coaches poll. Musketeer fans, it feels like we may have arrived.
Yes. Well, they're looking there, and that'd be a wonderful Christmas present. But let's get right to it. You know, what we thought would be a quiet week with, exams and pre-conference cupcakes and all that, it turned into a little more interesting than we wanted. Youthful indiscretions, injury, illness, and a couple of games that were a lot closer than we expected them to be when we talked last week. So let's jump right into it. You mentioned the possibility of a trap game when we were talking last week, the layoff. Chris Mack gave him some time off. There was an afternoon start time for East Tennessee State. We're riding high in the polls, exams, and we almost got that trap game against ETSU.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because if you didn't, I was going to remind you and the fans that, yes, I did say, in fact, I said this is the perfect trap. Think about it. We were coming off beating number 16 Baylor, number 11 UC. Kent State was thrown in there, but then we beat Colorado, which was a big revenge game. So, yeah, exam week. We knew they weren't going to practice as much as they normally do. I thought it was the perfect trap, and it turned out almost to be. And then you had to look at the other side. East Tennessee State was 27-8 last year, was an NCAA participant. They won the Southern Conference, both the regular season and the tournament last year. So I knew this was going to be tough. And then throw in the factor, remember something we talked about last week, a lot of Xavier fans, and, you try to keep the team from listening to the media, but with social media, that's impossible to this day and age. There was a lot of talk, is this the best Xavier team ever? I just had this feeling, don't take this team lightly. That when you have a team like this coming in, it's almost like you say they're Super Bowl. They're looking for signature wins, things that they can hang their hat on for the rest of the season. So I was worried, and it almost came to fruition.
You with me there, Jim? I
was hoping you. Yeah, I heard noises too. I was going to ask you the same question. You there?
Yeah, I'm here now. Sorry to interrupt you. I tried to swipe some dirt off my phone and hit something that knocked us off. But anyway, go ahead. You were on a roll.
I did. It was just the perfect storm. I was worried about it again. This was a good ETUS. Eastern Tennessee State University Pirates team or Buccaneers, I guess they are. I was worried, and again, it almost came to fruition. And it was one of those games you kept waiting. I mean, they got off to a great start. The Musketeers did, and in fact, with almost halfway through the first half, they had a 15-7 lead. And you're kind of thinking, okay, this is gonna, they're just gonna keep extending this lead, pushing it out, put this team away. But within 4 minutes, with 7:40 left in the first half, ETUS had actually gained the lead. It hit some 3-pointers, some shots that maybe you're like, okay, that's going in. But then they were down by 12 at halftime, and so you started to worry at that point.
But not only 12, like you said, did 22 in the middle of the second half, and so. And a couple other things going into it that we haven't mentioned. There were the Buckeyes were a little shorthanded. A couple of freshmen ran afoul of Chris Mack's rules, and they got sat down. And then we had to face a couple injuries in the middle of that game that really affected us.
True. And actually, I didn't even know, and I would guess most Musketeers fans maybe didn't know, maybe saw it the way I did. I didn't even realize they were suspended until the press conference after the game when Chris Mack opened. He said, these two freshmen were suspended, and that's all I'm going to say about it. And there's, that I'm not going to tell you why, that they broke team rules, and they're suspended for this game, and hopefully they'll be back for the next game. because here was my take when I did, kind of after you watched them, this was the 12th game, you kind of get the rotations down, and, usually Sean O'Mara comes in for Tariq Jones, so that's the first substitution. And then the next time it's usually Paul Scruggs coming off the bench to give Gooden a blow. And when Scruggs didn't get off the bench for a while, my thought was, if you go back to the Colorado game, remember he had the wind knocked out of him. Thought it was maybe a concussion because he was laying on top of Tariq Jones, and it looked like he was out, but actually he'd gotten the wind knocked out of him. So actually we thought, just sitting there, I thought, oh, maybe he has bruised ribs, and they've decided, to give him a game off. And Elias Harden, who sometimes doesn't play very much anyway, so there, it was after that game that I was informed, and I think most Musketeer fans, that the reason they didn't play is because they had broken some team rules and were not available for that game. But, yeah, then you have J.P. McCura, of course. What we know now was some type of concussion, and he's in concussion protocol. And Kaiser Gates, although his injury didn't come till late in the game, and he actually re-entered the game at the very, very end when they were giving out their fouls with about 6 seconds left. So his wasn't even diagnosed till after the game. So, yeah, there's just a lot of things going on. But here's the thing I will point out, and then Chris Mack even said, the crowd just it was a game that, that was the biggest comeback in Cintas Center history. They were down 22 points with 14:26 remaining. They were down 51-29, 22 points with 14:26 remaining in the game. That's when I turned and looked at my friend and I said, they're in trouble. This might not be their day.
Yep. So you call that, we did sneak away from it, and let's but as you say, let's give the East Tennessee State Buccaneers their due. They got 4 losses on the year, but 2 of them now are to Xavier at number 10 and UK also in the top 10, and they've already avenged one of those losses. They lost in the opener to the Northern Kentucky Norse, and they've revenged that already with a victory over them just a couple of days before the Xavier game. And I don't know why they're playing 2 games against each other. It might have been a tournament thing. I haven't quite hit it. But the other thing about that is, I don't know if you saw this, but for the Southern Conference, another big thing last night is Wofford knocked off North Carolina. So maybe this small conference that doesn't get a lot, UNC Greensboro in the past has gotten some press there going that way. And also Furman took Tennessee down to the last minute or so. So lots of good teams there in the Southern Conference.
Yeah, actually I did. I actually watched the end of that North Carolina game as I returned home last night after our broadcast. I started a little preparation for this, and I was just scanning through ESPN and the scores, and I saw with about 3 minutes left that Wofford had North Carolina in trouble. And so I flipped over to that game. It was kind of interesting. It was ESPN2, and they actually had a split screen going with the Furman game. I'm thinking, man, this is like March Madness here. 2 teams on the verge of upsets, and we're going back and forth. Had kind of a flashback or a flash forward, however you look at it, to March Madness. Kind of got me in the mood. But, yeah, I did see that. And again, I think, in this day and age, they play a lot of games. Again, you're in that time, we've talked about it before, exams, the holidays, the travel, a lot of things going on in 18 to 22-year-olds' minds, and sometimes they just have off nights, and that's what I think leads to these big upsets or near upsets. I think the Volunteers actually did pull their game out. I didn't see the final score on that one.
The Volunteers did end up beating Furman 66-61, but it went down into the last minute. So a lot there, but also you followed up and, just an 81-77 squeaker against a very pesky Marshall team that came back strong in the second half. They were down 11 and turned it into a game before we were able to put them away. And one of the beautiful things about that is sort of the emergence of, once again, the strength of the graduate transfer, Kareem Cantor coming on strong, playing a lot of minutes, and basically sort of putting the Muskies on their back to win that one.
Yeah, and I was going to say, when we go back to the East Tennessee game, just one last point on Karam Kanter. He had 9 points and 6 rebounds, which is a strong performance for him coming off the bench. But key point of the game, 66-63, Musketeers down by 3 with the ball. They called timeout. And actually later I read or heard Chris Mack say they had drawn up a play for Trayvon Blewett, who actually had a kind of an off game, actually, before hitting the winning shot at the end. But they had drawn up a play for Blewett, but the way that it was being defended, a switch wasn't made, a mistake was made, and they left Karam Kanter wide open from 3, and he knocked it down to tie the game. And, yeah, you could talk about Karam Kanter all day, especially with his performance then against Marshall. Where would we be without Karam Kanter? You know, this is a guy that we had high expectations, kind of got off to a rough start, but now that he has fit into the system and figured the system out, we're starting to see why Chris Mack and actually Luke Murray's the one I think that recruited him out of Green Bay of Wisconsin. We're starting to see why they were so excited about him coming. Big 6'10" guy who we talked about could step away from the basket and hit some shots. And again, I think he missed his first 6 3-pointers in the season, but now we've seen him hit some big 3-pointers. And go back to the UC game. Remember, he hit a couple in the first half in that game to help the Musketeers extend their lead and win that game fairly easily. So yeah, Karam Kanter, man. What a find for the Musketeers. But usually, lately it seems like we've been doing that. Last year it was Rasheed Gaston and Malcolm Butler.
Well, let's talk about this Marshall game. I mean, look at Kareem's one in 35 minutes. Not great shooting, 3 for 9 from the field, only 1 for 6 from 3-point land. But underneath the boards, ended up 9 for 9 from the free throw line. Had 13 rebounds. 16 points, and again, across the board. Again, it's still a little short-handed, but the 8 guys who played, and that's probably the one negative that I see, is kind of had to go back to these long minutes. Kanter playing 35, Gooden 34, Blewett 39. What was a tight game because we could only go 8 deep with the illness and the injuries that they're dealing with right now, which will be up soon. But the beautiful thing is 5 Muskies come up into double figures to eventually take down the Thundering Herd.
Yeah, and, the concern going into that game was that Marshall, I think they were ranked 10th in the country in scoring. I know they were coming in with an 89-point average per game. So that was kind of concerning. You knew they could score some points. And again, Chris Mack, I think, he does an excellent job with, you learn that he knew Gates and McCura were going to play, but nobody else knew until that starting introductions were done. He does that, of course, not to tip his hand in what the other team might prepare for. But in the first half of that game, I felt really good because, and in fact, I think I mentioned to you last night as we were talking, I had the thought Najee Marshall just had an unbelievable first half. Without those 2 in there, without J.P. McCura in there, he was pretty much kind of taking his spot. He had a nice first half. He started out with 7 points, I think 3 rebounds, and just had some great drives to the basket. And my thought was, here's the next Xavier superstar. We're not going to see it so much this year, although he's a good complementary piece. But when McCura and Blewett are gone, he's going to, I think, be their scorer. Actually hit a 3-point shot. Might have been his first of the season, first or second, and supposedly he is a great shooter, but again, with the other players of the team, we don't really need him to do that this year. But I thought, but then right before the half, he goes down with some bizarre injury because, again, I had to watch the videotape twice to even see what had happened because it looked like he might have got kicked or something because he was in agonizing pain, rolling on the floor, and the trainers had to come out and help him to the locker room. I just read last night, basically he has had back problems in the past, and he just tweaked something. The way he made a steal right at the end of the game into the half and tried to throw it up toward the basket, and he kind of twisted his body in a weird way. And so supposedly that tweaked it. And if anybody's not going to play on Friday, I would guess it might be him. Although, sometimes with backs, there's treatment with heat and stretching, and maybe he will be fine. Maybe it's something that he'll just have to deal with. So, but I felt good at the end of the first half, but they had a 20-point lead going into halftime. But again, we just couldn't put them away. But, we were playing so short. And actually, the three-headed monster put their stats together. What I'm doing quick math here, 44 points, 29 rebounds. Although it wasn't just 40 minutes out of the three this time, because there were many times during that stretch, just because they had to, that two of them would be on the floor. In fact, Chris Mack joked during his press conference that those three obviously were had their best games, and if he was smart enough, he'd figure out how to get all three of them on the floor at the same time, but he said he wasn't that smart.
Yeah, and then let's figure that. It was tough. Might have been a little fatigue factor, like you said, up by 20, and Marshall just kept poking away. They had it, down to 7 with a minute left, and C.J. Burks with a couple of very clutch three-pointers, and of course John Elmore had one just as time ran out, which is just sort of made the score closer. But at one point it was down to 5 points and a little scary. So that another one that the Muskies escaped, and hopefully they can get back going with Northern Illinois coming up this week before we get to the Big East schedule. So you're ready to go on and talk about NIU.
Well, just a couple points, and you alluded to it. It's a game, we say it usually the opposite way, but this game, the score wasn't as close as it looked, because if you go back and look at it, they actually hit 3 3-pointers in the last 30 seconds, and that was just to bring them within 4 points. They had a 13-point lead with a little under 4 minutes to go. So they kept shooting. They kept hitting those 3-pointers at the end, but the Musketeers pretty much had stretched the lead out far enough that it was almost impossible for the Thundering Herd to come back. And one other point, and we talked about this a lot last year. Well, two things. The thing that has really carried this team, and you got to love going forward, is their free throw percentage. Shooting right about 80% as a team. Sean O'Mara, a big man, and sometimes big men have trouble with the free throw. He's shooting right under 90%. And Tariq Jones is shooting like 60%, but that's a big improvement for him. Last year, I think he was down in the 30 or 40%. So as a team, and Chris Max talked about it, they have improved on free throws. And as you know, that a lot of times is a key, especially when you get into March. The one concern, although I don't think it's a big concern, because if we go back to the Eastern Tennessee game, I think they only had 9 turnovers. They can keep it under 10. I'm happy. They did have 18 turnovers, but again, with the different combinations they had to play, Elias Harden had to play a lot. He put in 18 minutes, most he has all year. The freshman, who again in my eyes just hasn't figured the college game up, hasn't gotten up to speed. He was in there. You got the big guys handling the ball a little bit more than you usually do. I'm not too concerned with the 18 turnovers. I think that is not going to be indicative of what we'll see out of this team. They've been, in the last few weeks, they've been keeping it right around 10. So a couple final points there. But as Chris Mack said, I'm not even going to watch this tape. There's no reason to watch this tape.
Well, if you can take that off, that's great. You do that. That brings us to the University of Northern Iowa Panthers, who are coming in at 8-3, and again, a team that could be easy to overlook from the Missouri Valley Conference. But when you look at who they played, and they've got 3 losses, but they're to North Carolina, Villanova, and Iowa State, and they have wins over Southern Methodist and North Carolina State and UNLV. So this is going to be a game where the Muskies are going to have to bring their best again.
Yeah, this game from the very get-go, when I looked at the schedule and I saw that going on the road on December 22nd and then saw the opponent, this game worried me at that point. Actually, when I was down in Florida last year, many of the Northern Iowa team and most of their fans were staying at the same resort. So I spoke to them. Nice people. Iowa is kind of like Indiana, a very basketball crazy state. High school basketball in Iowa is very, very big. Of course, some of that relates to the agrarian nature of the two states, Indiana and Iowa. You know that those farm boys, about the only sport they get a chance to play is basketball during the winter when the farm work kind of pares back. But I looked at their roster, and this did not surprise me, and there's a reason I looked at it. Over half their players are from Iowa, so they grew up in that area. Here's the way I look at this game. You know who this team basically is? Who was in that same place 10 years ago, probably?
I'm sure you're going to tell me.
The Xavier Musketeers. I can relate to this game 10, 15 years ago when Xavier had a big opponent coming in and how amped up the fans got. You know, this is our chance to show the country that, we are one of the best mid-majors and we are moving toward. And you got to go back not too far, 2010 in the NCAA tournament when they upset number 1 Kansas. I don't know if you remember that, but yeah, this is a scary game. Good news is it looks like Gates and McCura both will play. They both practiced yesterday, full go. So it looks like they've probably gotten, unless there's something that crops up, but between now and then it looks like they're ready to go out of their concussion protocol. No word on Najee Marshall, whether he will be available or not, but it looks like the starting 5 anyway will be back intact for this game. And, the other thing I noticed on their roster is I would say half their roster were red shirts. So it's almost like a system where they bring their freshmen in and they don't even play the first year, get their feet under them in college basketball, and then and right now they have 3 redshirt seniors. That means these are 3 guys that have been on campus for 5 years and with the team, and actually 2 of them, 6'10", Bennett Cook and 6'7", Clint Carlson, are 2 of their leading scorers, 5th-year seniors. So they've got some experience, and I just know the atmosphere in Northern Iowa on a Friday night in the middle of winter. I'm sure it's going to be packed, and I'm sure it's going to be crazy. So, but look at the positive side. I think the other side of it is this will be a good experience for the Musketeers to go into a hostile environment. Remember, it's hard for us to remember because they did go to Las Vegas, but they've really only played 1 true road game, and, of course, that was that early season win at Wisconsin.
Yeah, a lot of things going on. You got to remember that this Northern Iowa team, by a little fluke, you mentioned the trip down to Florida. The Muskies ended up playing them back-to-back because they'd already scheduled these games. So they played in Florida and lost to the Muskies 67-59, and turned around and came to Cintas, and we beat them 64-42. But this is also a conference that's made some noise. Loyola Chicago has already beaten Florida, and most people will probably remember that this is the conference that Wichita State played in before they moved to the American Athletic this year. So they're used to playing quality opponents. Wichita State actually just tied for the season record last year against Illinois State, and Northern Iowa was 3rd, even though they're only 14-16 that year. So, like you say, a little different on the road, a lot of things going on there. And, of course, what you hope doesn't happen is that the Muskies find themselves relaxing a little bit and not quite performing up to snuff, one, for the holiday coming up, but also for the fact that before we talk again, they'll have opened up the Big Ten season at Marquette next Wednesday.
Yeah, that's a very scary proposition right there, that two big games on the road. And, just the travel alone, figuring that all out, the Christmas holiday right there in the middle. I don't know when or how the players go home, but I'm sure they spend at least a little bit of time with their family. I'm kind of guessing they'll probably from the game on Friday. They'll probably travel on Saturday and probably have to be back on campus by Sunday night or Monday night, Christmas night. I would guess they will reconvene, because then Monday's probably the travel game, or Wednesday would be the that game on the 27th. So yeah, that's a concern. The Big East finally, it seems like, has given the Musketeers a little bit of a reprieve. It seemed like the first 4 years we were always playing Villanova really early and having a tough go at that, and they're not scheduled until I think the first game at Villanova is the January 10th game, so that's a little bit down the road. They get a little bit of a reprieve. But I just looked at, I thought, well, Marquette's kind of got to go through the same thing, but here's on the other side, Marquette, they're playing tonight, and they're playing at home. And, of course, then the game with the Musketeers on the 27th is at home, so there's not as much travel involved for Marquette. And Marquette's a scary team. We talked about them a little bit on the Trodcast. They're shooting about 40% from three-point. They're one of the best three-point shooting teams in the country. So, yeah, it's going to be a tough stretch here for this next week. But, again, I like this because I think these situations and overcoming this adversity and having to deal with it, I think it helps you when you get into March.
Yeah, and no doubt about it. And talking about the Big East, I mean, we follow up Marquette with the Paul. We'll talk about them. But all of the Big East teams are probably going to go into Big East to play with winning records, the worst one being DePaul. But even DePaul might not be the cupcake we thought they were. Their 5 losses now are to Notre Dame, Illinois, Michigan State, Oregon, and Northwestern. So they're going to be stronger. We know St. John's is going to be stronger than they've been in the past. But you all right over there? Okay.
I'm having trouble hearing you. You keep cutting out. So
okay.
I don't know what's going on.
We were having it seemed like dinosaur noises coming out of your ear. Yeah, right there. I don't know if you're blowing your nose or what's going on there. It sounds like that. But the Big East, like I just said, DePaul, the weakest one, but their losses are all the quality teams, and they've got some good wins there. We know St. John's is going to be stronger. Georgetown might be down a little bit, but still, it's going to be like one of those old wrestling matches where you can tag people in, tag people out. It's just there's going to be blood on the mat by the time that the season's done, and you just don't know. I mean, Xavier, remember, they ended up finishing, 7th last year in the regular season before they made that great Elite 8 run. So a lot of things can happen when you go to the Big East.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. In fact, a team you didn't mention, although a lot of people thought would do well, and they're not doing poorly, Providence, but Providence kind of dealing with some of the same issues as Xavier's, had a couple key injuries. In fact, I was watching them Sunday, and they were down double digits to Stony Brook, which, again, is not a NCAA power by any means. Actually, I didn't even think they had a 500 record, but they were playing Stony Brook at home, got down by double digits. Actually, it was interesting that Ed Cooley put one of his walk-ons in the game, and he felt that maybe some of his scholarship players weren't playing up to snuff, and it kind of spurred them, and they did come back and won that game at the very, very end. So, here's the one thing I do like about it, though. We don't have the UC game sitting out there in the middle of all this Big East because, from top to bottom, you're right. Anybody can beat anybody, I think, on any given night. And, I think DePaul has improved. They got that new arena, I think, maybe spurring some more fan interest up there. So you can't take anybody for granted. And I'll go back. I said this before. I'll say it again. Nobody's going to go undefeated in the Big East, although Villanova probably right now playing the best in the entire country, and they're scary. They just they play very well. They got a lot of talent. They got great coaching. But they're probably going to go through a stretch too. Everybody does that goes through a stretch like Xavier just did, where you have some injuries or you have some, here's something that I'll throw out there that has been kind of mentioned out on the internet with some people that maybe have some ins blew its performance the other night, he may not have been 100%, whether he's under the weather a little bit with some illness or maybe even a little bit of a nagging injury. But again, here's what I like about the whole deal and the way Chris handles it. There's no excuses. It is what it is. We go with who we got. We play as hard as we can, and that's a sign of a quality program. You move on, next guy up. These guys, we go 10 deep, and that's one of the strengths of the Musketeers this year, or at least nine quality players that get in quality minutes. That's going to make this team tough in the Big East. And again, a lot of people talk about, hey, we got to get to the Final Four. I just heard it last night on one of the shows. Xavier is known as the team that has won the most games in the NCAA tournament who has not reached the Final Four. They'd like to get that monkey off their back. But I think an even bigger goal or step forward for this team would be to win the regular season of the Big East, because that is just a tough thing to do with the quality of that league.
Well, we talked about this a while back on the Razor Cast, when people started bringing up it was just the best team ever, and it comes down. I don't think you can say that without championships. I mean, people don't remember the Seattle Mariners and their 116 wins because they went out in the first round, and even that great New England Patriots team that went 18-1. They didn't win the Super Bowl, but and then we're not talking the next national championships, like we said. It has to be going to the Final Four, and a Big East championship, I think, needs to be in there. They need to get Villanova out of there to move up. But a long season ahead, and you bring up an important point, I think, is there's no Big East break this year. After Northern Iowa, it's all Big East through the regular season. There's no break, whether it's play Cincinnati or and some people play somewhere else with Xavier. It's just Big East team after Big East team until the last one against DePaul in Chicago on March 3rd, and then we'll see where we are from there. So there'll be lots of things to talk about next week. Northern Iowa game, we'll have our first Big East game. There's going to be a lot more things going on. So just stay tuned as we head into the Big East season, and just about when everything can happen. I mean, we got Villanova right now at the top, 11-0. Nobody's playing any games. The Muskies at 11-1. They're only lost to the team that's number 3. Georgetown with just 1 loss. And Creighton, Seton Hall, St. John's coming in with just 2 losses. And, like you said, it's not going to stay there, but it's going to be fun to watch a lot of these games as they play out. Now, are you going to head up north next week and watch that game with your son?
Probably not, but you never know. You know how I am. Spur of the moment, maybe. Never know. But right now there are no plans. Yeah, and talking about that, I actually perused through a lot of the Big East schedules, and I do remember Villanova actually, they do have a big non-conference game in the middle of their schedule. They will be playing the UConn Huskies sometime in. So, but yeah, I like the fact that, I think those games like that, maybe not so much in that game. I'm not sure that's that big of a rivalry, but I just worry about that Xavier UC game because I think it hurts them before the game because they start thinking about it down the road. They're going to play UC in a week or so. Maybe takes their mind off preparing for games before that game. And then I think it's just a major letdown after that game, win or lose. They get so high for that game. There's so much intensity and so much emotion that they almost have a hangover for the next game or two and sometimes can lose it. But, yeah, back to a very important point you make. Remember, everybody, hey, we had a great year last year. We were in the Elite Eight. That's what everybody remembers. This Xavier team was 9-9 in the Big East Conference last year and probably was, there were 7 teams that went to the NCAA, probably was number 7 and only probably got in because they got a couple wins in the Big East tournament there right at the end. I remember they beat Butler and somebody else, I think. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this I think this is their best shot at a Big East championship. And again, that to me, that would be a great accomplishment because, making a run in the NCAA tournament, you get hot at the right time. Winning the Big East, you got it's a 2-month grind that you got to go through in order to win that.
Yeah. Well, look forward to that. We'll wish them well in Iowa. tomorrow night, 9 o'clock game. It's on the CBS Sports Network. If you want to watch that, not the usual Fox 1, which is what they're on usually here in Cincinnati. But and before we get into our trivia and tidbits, make sure everybody has a great holiday. Buy lots of things, blue and gray, blue and white, and pass them out to the kiddies and the babies. And we'll be back on the air on Thursday with our next RazorCast. Still deciding whether or not we'll have our Troutcast on Tuesday with the holiday, since there's not going to be a whole lot going on in the NCAA. But look on the Grueling Truth website, and it'll let you know if there. But let's go on down to one of your favorite things there, Jim. Let's end with our trivia and tidbits.
Well, the Musketeers, with their win against Marshall the other night, that was their 39th straight win against non-conference foes in the Cintas Center. 39 straight. Last time they lost, kind of interesting here, December 22nd, 2012, anniversary 5 years tomorrow. Who was the last non-conference team to beat the Musketeers at the Cintas Center?
Oh, wow. I saw this when there was an article talking about that in the run, because somebody else had lost at home, and I think the Muskies are now like the second, or it might even be the first for non-conference teams. But
you need a hint? You need a hint?
I always need a hint.
Well, they had a very big upset last night.
Wofford?
Wofford.
Oh,
Wofford
wow.
beat the Musketeers 56-55 on December 22nd, 2012. And as always, I got a follow-up question for you. I always,
okay.
I like this. What's the Wofford mascot? Very unique. I'm sure it's the only one in the country.
I should know this because that young man that I mentioned that's at Dartmouth now actually did his undergraduate at Wofford, and I went down there for his graduation. Ali Damasio, come to me in the inner spirit and tell me.
You want a hint?
Why don't you just tell me?
Okay, the Terriers.
The Terriers. Well,
which is a dog, I believe, right?
It is a dog, yes.
Okay.
It is a dog in there.
So the Wofford Terriers were the last non-conference team to have success in the Cintas Center. I think that with Kansas losing the other night, that might be best in the country, but I'm not sure about that.
Wofford, beautiful campus right there on the border of South Carolina and North Carolina. A little unknown school, does a great job all the way around, and we're glad for their success last night against North Carolina, and hope that continues, except when they're playing the Muskies. Okay.
Exactly.
Is that the end of my 9-step trivia question, or?
Actually, I had one more, but you already answered that. So I was going to ask you, do you know who they beat last night? But I know you know that because you had mentioned that earlier in the broadcast. That they had upset the number 5, I think, North Carolina Tar Heels, which actually is a good. If the Musketeers can come out of Northern Iowa with a win, I think with that and North Carolina loss, they might move up another notch in the top 10. But again, just being in the top 10. In fact, that's another point. I think that's where the Musketeers, again, in these last 2 games, when you got that low number in front of your name, you're getting the best shot of everybody because they know that they're going to be on SportsCenter if they could beat you.
Number 5, North Carolina, lost to the Bears. And, we'll see. But we were up as high as, number 6, 7 last year before we took a little tumble. So,
actually, that was a question. In the future is a question I was going to maybe use. I don't know. I think we were at 5 at one point. That might be the highest in Xavier history. The year they beat number 1 Villanova at home 2 years ago. Yeah, it's 2 years ago. Remember, we had the great season, which ended with the Wisconsin loss. I think when they played Villanova, they were number 5. Not sure why they wouldn't have gone up, but I'll look into that one. I don't know the answer to that right off the top of my head, but we know they've never been number 1 in the country. That's the goal.
They have not, but we'll take the top 10 for now with all the great teams that are in there, and of course they might move up. You never know with North Carolina, but a lot of things to go on between now and there. What we'll take is, like we just said, number 1 in the Big East on March 3rd, and hopefully make that first Final Four and get that monkey off their back like Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs did last year. All right, let's end here with a few fun tidbits. It's always sad when we lose someone during the holidays, but this is a nice little story. Mamie Johnson passed away just this last Monday. Miss Johnson, who went by the name of Peanut, was the only woman to pitch in the Negro Leagues with the Indianapolis Clowns in 1953. There were just a handful of women to play in those leagues, and most came in as the Negro Leagues fought to keep their footing after the integration of Major League Baseball started taking their best players. But Ms. Johnson was the only one to pitch. Most of them, again, brought in as a novelty to help keep attendance. The 5'3", 120-pound Johnson got her nickname at her tryout from a Clowns teammate who was making fun of her and called her Peanut on the mound. She challenged him to come into the box and promptly struck him out. And she played 3 years on the Clowns and earned a 33-8 record over that time. And later in her life, she also helped establish a little league in Washington, D.C., where she settled the Mamie Peanut Johnson Little League, which has mixed gender squads. And been remiss on our birthday baby, so we'll catch up on that. Greg McDermott, we missed him around Thanksgiving. On November 25th, he turned 54, the Creighton coach. And Jay Wright is the Christmas Eve baby. Shout out to the Villanova coach who will turn 56 in a couple of days. And, of course, Chris Mack will turn 48, the baby of the three, on December 30th. Also, a couple other Xavier birthdays. Nick Vanderpool, the walk-on from Harrison, Ohio, will turn 19 on January 3rd. Our old and a couple of former players, Edmund Sumner is going to turn 24 on December 31st, New Year's Eve baby, and Jalen Reynolds will turn 25 on the 30th. But the best birthday present we could ever have was 126 years ago. The first documented game of basketball, as we said on our Trogcast the other day, was in Springfield, Massachusetts. As Dr. James Naismith. It's neat to read up on the history. This is one of the reasons he brought that up is this YMCA that he worked for had an unruly group of kids, and the director gave him a week to come up with an indoor game that they could play to help calm their nerves a little bit and burn off some energy, and that's when he developed basketball. And it was neat to look at it. Some of the things, the first game was actually 9-on-9, not 5-on-5, because he had 18 students in the class. And he used a soccer ball because he thought that would be the softest of them, and they couldn't get at each other. Of course, we know about the famous peach baskets that they tied up to have it. And, of course, there was a jump shot after every basket. And there were only 13 rules at the time. Some of the fun ones were, of course, there was no dribbling. You had to pass it from person to person. And the reason he did this was too many injuries happened because people were running around. That's the most fun rule that I found was, when we talked about that later, he said most of the fouls were for running with the ball, though tackling the man with the ball was not uncommon in that first game. They played 2 15-minute halves, and if you had 3 fouls in a row on your team, that meant a basket for the other team. So lots of things have developed since then. Checking out the history of basketball with Dr. James Naismith, who, of course, then moved on to the University of Kansas, and in his time coached people like Fog Allen and Adolph Rupp, and is known as the father of basketball. So fantastic Christmas present for everybody to get basketball in the holiday season. We want to wish all our listeners a fantastic Christmas and Kwanzaa and Hanukkah and whatever you're celebrating out there, and a fantastic New Year. We'll be back next Thursday for our weekly Razorcast, and check the Grueling Truth to see if we decide to go ahead and have our Trogcast on the 26th with everything that's going on. Jim, I want to wish you and all the many members of your family that I've grown to know and love so much. Enjoy them all together during this season, and we will sure we'll see each other and talk to each other several times before our next cast.
Hopefully this afternoon.
That's true. All right, so everybody enjoy your holidays, and we'll see you next time. And until then,
go Muskies.